It's funny, about half the time it shows up live on Facebook on this screen before it shows up on the other screen that I put up. It's just a weird thing. But good morning, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to Veterans Voices. This is our Veterans Voices number 16. We're heading to California. My name is Michael Crowitz, and I'm with Al Byrne. We're with Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access, and we try to interview veterans around the country that are interesting and have a compelling story to tell in our space, working on cannabis activism and drug policy reform. Chris Coulombe, am I saying that right, Chris?
Coulombe. Someone's hot, you cool them down.
Cool them down. All right, Chris Coulombe. I got it pretty close. Chris Coulombe, coming from California. Chris is actually running for California's 2nd congressional district in June, and he has a pretty amazing story. Enlisted in the military as 18, and returned home 16 years later as a captain. He has quite a bit to tell. I'll hand it over to Al. You want to say a word of introduction or two, Al?
Yeah, thanks to guys for joining Veterans Voices today, and my respect to all the Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access volunteers that we have out there. You don't get thanked, and your names are not generally known. They're known to me and Mike and a few others, but you know, sort of a generalized thank you to you folks, men and women who have represented other veterans on behalf of other veterans in various states around the country and territories, and have done well. They've spoken about veteran needs and issues. They've gotten a lot of positive things to happen in your state capitals. And if you guys know any of these people who have stood up, you know, pat them on the back, buy them a beer or something. These folks have done us all well. And we like folks that stand up. Military mind is pretty uncomplicated. You stand next to the people on either side of you and you do your job. That's as simple as it is. Very difficult, but simple. And the things that Mike and I have found on this show, you know, I don't think it's any, this isn't sort of enlightening, but the folks that come on this show are still serving. Whatever they're doing, they're serving in some capacity. And I think that is so important, both for having a happy life and for doing things for others that matter. It might not be much, but anything can count. And so this fellow Chris here, Mike and I, those are dogs, they're all right. Mike and I talked with Chris on a Veterans Action Council meeting a couple of weeks ago almost, and we were impressed. This fella is somebody that we'd like you to think about supporting, especially if you're out there in Northern California. That's where he really needs to help. But listen to what he has to say. He's a really nice guy. He's not Navy, you know, so but we won't hold that against him. Hey, Chris, welcome.
Thank you very much, Al. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate the intro. So,
well, this is your show. You know, we want you to talk. So if you would give the folks a background of where you came from and whatever you want to tell us about your military career, and then, you know, family, whatever you want to talk about. And then we'll get to what you're doing now, which is very, very important.
That sounds great. So I grew up here in Sonoma County, born and raised, and spent a lot of time just out in the mountainside with Boy Scouts and so on. Ended up getting my Eagle Scout. I was a high school dropout as well. Ended up dropping off the high school circuit in 11th grade, but knew I needed discipline, knew I needed focus. And so I actually ended up enlisting in the Navy. So my very first enlistment, I served 4 years in the Navy. I got into the gunner's mate school and really was taught discipline, focus, how to bring myself to a higher level of competition. And through that experience, I got recommended for the Naval Academy. Turns out at 22 years old, you're too old to into the Naval Academy. And so I ended up going home to Santa Rosa and studying, getting my undergraduate, working on getting my undergraduate. During that time, I kind of became frustrated with the civilian life and ended up moving to Brazil. Lived in Brazil for a little while, and just wanted to see another side of society, another side of culture, another side of the world, and learn more perspectives, see things from another view. And Brazil certainly did that for me. It was an eye-opening, very insightful experience to have. And from there, I was sitting on a beach in Brazil, drinking água de coco, and decided it was time that I stood up again. So I ended up joining the Marine Corps. Went in, I think I was 25, 26 when I joined the Marine Corps. Had an amazing experience there. Ended up getting recommended for an officer program there as well. So I went to one session of the platoon leaders course, which is their version of OCS, where they break it into two sections, 2 6-week courses, as opposed to one 10-week course. And that was at the time where I was attending University of San Francisco, working on getting my degree in politics. And so when I had to walk from my dorm room to the campus, there was an ROTC unit that was right between the two. They had strategically placed themselves where everybody had to walk. And so every so many days, there was a major there that would stand outside and say, "Hey, Chris." So he kept talking, and he eventually offered me a full ride scholarship for $200,000 to help cover everything. And I said, I'll take this if you can guarantee me infantry officer. And so we worked out the deal, and he ended up sticking to his word and became an infantry officer. Got my commission in 2010 and ended up headed out to Georgia, did my training there, and then obviously went through all of the courses that they throw at you. I had an amazing time in the infantry, got all my training completed, headed out to Hawaii. I was a striker leader, striker platoon leader with the 25th Infantry Division. Got to do a lot of amazing training, meet a lot of amazing people. And from there, I ended up being assigned as the officer in charge of the Air Assault School for the Hawaii, for the Asia Pacific. So everybody that came from Hawaii, Japan, many of our partner nations, Philippines, and so on, came out to do their training. So I was helping people get trained in air assault operations, jumping out of helicopters, doing sling load operations, etc. I had an amazing crew of very senior NCOs out there, many of which I'm still in touch with, and they are just a phenomenal set of people. After that, I got assigned to what was basically a dream job for me, and that was working at the Daniel K. Inouye Asia Pacific Center for Security Studies. And there I got to meet with a lot of top minds that study things that are very pressing to our international community, understanding what's going on geopolitically, how we're dealing with the transnational issues that many countries are facing, that they need to work together on a very high level to address or mitigate or solve, provide solutions to, and really help understand people from very different backgrounds, very different countries, dealing with very different problems, how to work together, how to bring the whole of government into a place where it can be of benefit and help in a positive way. Some of the things that they helped work on were addressing the downed airplane that took place several years ago, helping facilitate the finding some of the wreckage and trying to get to the truth of what happened. Some of the others is helping several countries inside of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, come together and negotiate several items of interest for multiple parties. This is kind of revolving around what was taking place at the time. This is 2014-15, where there was a lot of things really developing quickly in the South China Sea. And that was China's move to expand their economic exclusionary zone, which is what they call the 9-dash line. It's a large segment of the South China Sea that they're claiming as their own. And so that was ruffling and still is ruffling a lot of feathers. And this organization kind of brought to bear people with doctorate degrees that really understood all the nuances that you could even hope to imagine about these very specific and nuanced challenges that they were working very hard to make sure did not turn into something bigger. And so that was a phenomenal firsthand experience for me to have. And just watching government and military address some very high level policy issues on the ground, working both at a military level and at a administrative governance level. And it was very, very impressive and very informative for me. And it showed me what it was that I really wanted to put my time and my effort towards. Going back to the educational experience, I got my undergraduate in politics from the University of San Francisco, and I was lucky to be selected for a program called the Washington Semester, which is a very long-running program out of American University. I think they started it in 1946 or 1948. And what they do is they pull people from all over the country to study for a semester in Washington and get firsthand exposure and experience from the various bodies of government that are there. So if you want to learn more about law, they'll let you intern at the Supreme Court or let you get a job working somewhere with a member of Congress. And I was very lucky, and I got a internship at the Pentagon. I got to spend some time there as a cadet. And at the time, the cadets, they have you wear just a little black dot on your rank, which at the time sat in the middle of your chest. It also had a tendency to look a lot like Lieutenant Colonel's oak leaf. And so I'd walk through the Pentagon hallways, and I definitely looked a little bit younger than most lieutenant colonels. And so people would walk by, and it would catch their attention. There's this guy walking through looking like a lieutenant colonel. So that was always a fun experience where I'd say, no, I'm nothing. I'm just a guy. I'm trying to find my way to the right room. And I had a good time. I worked with some brilliant minds there in the strategic studies group. It was basically an in-house think tank where generals and admirals would show up and say, I need to know everything about the F-22 program by Friday. And then that team would just show up with tomes of knowledge and information ready to debrief whichever flag officer showed up and said, give me XYZ. And it was amazing. I got to learn some of the nuances of data presentation, research, and really understanding at a very high level how our military strategy works, the positioning and pivoting of forces and purposes of those branches, forces within them, and see that at an amazingly high level at a very low rank for myself. Again, I was a cadet, and sitting inside those hallowed halls was very amazing and eye-opening experience for somebody who didn't even have his butter bar yet. And it was an amazing time. So going back to the program, I studied international law and organizations, where I had to thoroughly understand and investigate everything from the UN to the international criminal courts. You name the organization, if it's at an international level, it was covered. And we eventually flew out to Europe for about a month, and we went to all of these various institutions. So we got to go from Brussels all the way down to Geneva, stopping at all of these different locations along the way. So went through many of the different facets of the EU. That is a very large and complex organization that is attempting to accomplish some very large and complex things. From there, I got to go on and meet just some of the great minds that are really building the structure of this international community and the organizations that try and protect the rights and structures of the nations of the world. And so that was a phenomenal and again, eye-opening experience. I actually got to watch the very last day of the Charles Taylor trial at the International Criminal Court. So for those that don't remember, he was one of the warlords from Africa, heavily involved in the diamond trade, loosely using the term. But I got to sit there, watch the sentencing, talk to the prosecution, talk to the defense, understand why they took so many certain approaches when it came to finding truths, finding information, and then again, kind of watching how a particular institution plays out in the international arena. From there, I went again to the Daniel K. Inouye Center for Security Studies, and at the time, I was working on my master's program from Norwich University, and so I very heavily focused on what was taking place in China. I had some amazing help from great people at the center that helped me really parse through kind of what you don't get in the books and understanding the history of maritime law, understanding how precedent and many of the machinations of policy from various nations has played out over time, and how it interfaces with each other, in an international sense. And so I really spent a lot of time delving into that, ended up writing my thesis on the South China Sea and ways to avoid conflict with China there. And that was phenomenal. I loved doing that. Truly, that's where my brain lived, and loved everything about what I was learning. So I think I owe it all to the military and to the Boy Scouts for showing me what I can do. Once you put your mind to things, obviously cliche phrases, but certainly still hold true. And so I've spent a lot of my time studying international law, international policy, international relations, and really paying attention to geopolitics. And I think that that's an important thing for us to make sure we keep our eye on. It is the element that really drives the structure of our world. And the better we can understand that, particularly as veterans who have really played a role in the shaping of world law and the execution of world law, it is a piece of history that we will always be a part of. And I think it's best that we fully understand what it was. One of the kind of promulgating experiences that I had that really pushed me into international law was when on my first deployment, we had stopped in Spain. We were in Valencia, Spain. We ended up meeting some locals. We were playing volleyball on the beach, and it was an awesome time. And they asked me a few questions about the government, and about this is 2001, pre 9/11. They'd asked me why the U.S. government had certain perspectives, and I, as an 18-year-old kid, I was hard charging, ready to go do my duty, and I remember thinking, I don't have that answer. And I told them that. I said, I don't know. And so they kind of made that inference. Maybe you should know that. And that stuck with me. That was 23 years ago. And I asked myself why I was committing myself to something that I was ready to die for, but I couldn't well articulate to other people, whether from my country or not. And so that really kind of put me down the path of making sure that I fully understood what was taking place in the world and what my part in that process was. And so that's what drove me to do the college path that I did. And it was really, it stuck with me. So I was very glad to have that conversation at 18. And I think 3 or 4 months later, I was in the Persian Gulf enforcing UN Sanction 986, which was ensuring that the movement of material and I think oil out of Iraq was all done above board. So we were out there boarding ships, inspecting them. Any ship that was going into or coming out of Iraq, we were there inspecting it, conducting visit boards, search and seize operations. And it was an eye-opening experience as well. And then all of a sudden, we saw the planes crash into the towers it was on the screen while we were on the ships. And so we had a very interesting conversation with the crew, and we had to remind them who was who. And from that moment, we hopped back on our ships and we took off to another location. And it was a very pivotal experience in my lifetime. And that was, again, veterans taking part in history, which I think happens, almost every day if we really think about it. And so, I encourage veterans to very, very well understand what it is that they're doing and not discount the effort and the skill that they bring to bear or brought to bear to move forward the interests of this country. And so that's kind of what's kept me on the path of understanding politics and international relations and making sure that I understand what's going on in the world, what's going on with our country and how we play, what role we play in it. And I think by and large, veterans have always done great things behind the scenes to make sure that this country remains great. And I would encourage us to make sure that at this time in this world and in this country's history, that veterans are standing up and fully taking part in protecting this republic, making sure that we understand what it is to be a republic, that we understand everyone's role in it, not just as veterans, but as citizens. As George Washington said, when we assumed the soldier, we did not set down the citizen. And that is a very important message that really resounds with me. And it was a long message in a very short period of time that I got from that, and understanding exactly what he meant by assuming the soldier and by not setting down the citizen. And so I believe that, again, the veteran community has an obligation, it has a duty, and it has a right to stand up and make sure that our interests are heard, make sure that all of our efforts for the last 200 and almost 50 years, that those efforts, those sacrifices are heard. And I think from time to time, we kind of step back and we say, okay, we're gonna let this one go forward with hope. But today, based off of my experience, my education, and so on, it's my read that it is time for us to stand up again. It is time for us to get involved. It is time for us to lead this country to a better path. And that's why I stand up. I think, there's the phrase, the honor, courage, commitment, all of the principles that are imbued in us from day one in the military. They're not just words. They're not just things that apply during the military. They're things that are character forming. There are the elements of our person that we can't deny, we can't forget about. And that's a lot of what pushes me to do what I'm doing here, not only as a veteran, but as somebody who is a citizen of this republic, and making sure that we are doing our duty and meeting our obligations as citizens of the republic to ensure that it remains, as Ben Franklin said, a republic if we can keep it. And so that's on us. I think if there's anybody that has the highest obligations and the highest duties, it's veterans. And we need to make sure that we stand. We need to make sure that we try. We need to make sure that we provide the leadership and the mentorship and that rational, objective approach to moving the country forward. And I think we're ready to do that.
Yeah, but you're also a capitalist. You're also a capitalist. I heard that when I talked to you last week or week before. And we got to get into cannabis here. This is about the show, we do cannabis here. But
Yep.
I heard you talk about small businesses, creating jobs for people that were good jobs, healthy jobs, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
You were in the cannabis business. You're also a capitalist entrepreneur. So let's go to that side of your personality.
That sounds great. Yeah, after I got out of the military, I came back here to Sonoma County. Sonoma County has always had a history in cannabis. I grew up around it as a kid and then came back right around the same time that it was getting legalized. And I did some consulting for a few companies that weren't in the cannabis industry, eventually got approached by several of these companies, did some consulting for them, some analysis, and they brought me on. I ended up running some logistics operations, building out distribution for a few of them. We, at the time, and still do, have to transport cash. So I had to do cash logistics plus logistics for end products. And then eventually got approached by investment group, and we started a distribution operation here in Sonoma County. And that was a lesson in government that I will never forget. Dealing with local governments, dealing with state governments. Well, I really had started two companies. I started a distribution company and I started a consulting company. And for a while, I was running political campaigns. That helped me really understand the machinations of government. And from there, turning that into operational or operationalize the regulations before anybody had really done it. So I met with everybody from the governor's office all the way to the enforcement agents in the Bureau of Cannabis Control here in California, and spent a lot of time meeting with legislators and regulators, trying to make sense out of the industry's regulations, trying to make tweaks to try and create more viability for the organization or for the entities, and just make it so that cannabis operators can survive. Because as I continue to read the different bills, SB 420, and obviously 64, I began to see that there were some real shortcomings. And in fact, that turned out to be an understatement. I will say, empirically, I believe that the regulations written in Prop 64 were written specifically to remove cannabis operators that are small businesses. It's my read that the state of California does not want small businesses to be involved in the cannabis industry. They want 3 to 5 very large companies, and that's it. And so through that experience, I did my best through the two companies to provide the services and the operations necessary for small businesses, predominantly in Northern California, to succeed and exist. We had a company that had about 43 employees, 2 warehouses, sales team across the entire state of California. And we represented roughly 50 small businesses, 50 small farms between Sonoma County and Humboldt County, and really wanted to focus on bringing craft cannabis to the consumers, to all Californians. And we did our best to find the best cannabis that we could. And I felt like we've done that, or we did that. We represented some phenomenal farms. Many of them went on to be award-winning farms and are continuing to show their abilities. Another great experience that we had was we were the first presenting sponsor of the Emerald Cup, which is what I consider to be a legacy organization and a legacy event for the cannabis industry, and a phenomenal opportunity for farmers to firsthand show their craft to cannabis connoisseurs around the world. I think in 2018 we had about 25,000 attendees show up, and it was an amazing experience. We spent a lot of time working with the state of California to try and do that as seamlessly as possible, and it I think overall was a very very good experience for the industry. I wish that the organization stayed here in Sonoma County, but it was an amazing opportunity to really take the cannabis industry from behind the scenes and put it out in front of average Americans who were ready to progress forward. When it comes to the industry as a whole, it's sad to say that the the opportunity for amazing economic activity is there. There's no shortage of global demand for California cannabis. There's no shortage of demand for cannabis as a whole. And right now, what we're watching is this siloing of the various states and the restriction of their ability to access a full market. And I think that that's an inappropriate structure of government to block the free market. I understand that right now we're waiting on legislation at the federal level that can potentially do that. But right now, it's my assessment that the cannabis industry does not have a representative, does not have representation, not insofar as a direct representation of the small farms, small businesses of the cannabis industry. And so one of the reasons why I also stand in this particular district is because it covers the oldest and most historic cannabis production region in America, and that's the Emerald Triangle. Even Sonoma County has been a major part of that evolution for the industry. And I did a documentary trying to get the word out about the reality of Humboldt County. And unbeknownst to me, we did all of our filming around the same exact time that the Murder Mountain series was being produced. And so we were going around to different locations at the same time they were going around to different locations. And so we made a 20-minute documentary on the history of cannabis in America, and specifically the history of cannabis in California as it was developed out of Humboldt. And so that was really to try and spread the message worldwide that, you know, this is craft cannabis. This is the heartland of American cannabis. This is where everything that happens in the cannabis industry largely promulgated it from. And you know, that includes all of the people who have been advocating for cannabis for decades, and really were the people who were fighting from the very beginning to do something that we all eventually agreed was the right thing. And you know, there's many people that I think are owed a lot of gratitude to for getting this country as far as it has into opening access to cannabis. You know, I stepped in at a very late hour and did my part, you know, my small part just in the legal space. But that took 40 years to get to, just before I had the opportunity to show up. But I think that there is a real opportunity for a new economy, an economy that includes the cannabis industry. There's no shortage of skill sets, talented skill sets that are needed. It obviously has an entire supply chain of its own that can grow, that can feed and supply the global demand, which I truly believe would have the ability to generate substantial revenues. Right now, the estimates are that the state of California alone consumes about $1 billion a month in cannabis. And right now, about 75% of that is in the unregulated market. And everybody's losing on that front. And it's kind of a empirical demonstration that the regulations are not working, that the market is unable to compete with the unregulated market, and showing that there's a lot of improvements that are needed so that we can really get this plant out to anyone who needs it. I think we are ready to refine those operations and help the regulated market become the more beneficial place to be. And to do that, we need to allow for export. We need to allow for the transportation of cannabis goods across state lines. We need to be able to send that plant all the way to Europe, to wherever it is that it's wanted or needed. And I say this always talking about not just the recreational side of things, and I want to make sure that I'm directly and deliberately stating that this also includes the medical side of it as well. And I do that just because in California, there are actually two separate license types, but I always operated with both of them. And it was important to ensure that access was provided to those that needed and then those that wanted. The real opportunity, I think, is creating a whole new sector, a whole new economic sector that creates manufacturing jobs, logistics jobs, sales jobs, and then the entirety of a supply chain, of a global supply chain that can exist. But right now what's happening is the regulations are created in such a way to make that, one, not possible insofar as the supply chain, global supply chain, but two, to make it so onerous and expensive for small businesses to do, that we are watching hundreds of these small businesses disappear, from California at least. I hear that some states are doing better, but California, the small businesses are getting crushed in the cannabis space and outside of the cannabis space. So we need people to step up and represent that. And so again, I think it's necessary to do that as the representative of the district that holds the Emerald Triangle.
For sure. Hey, you
brought up. Oh, go ahead, Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Well, thanks, Al. I just want to dig into that a little bit. That this is really a big conundrum, what you described. I mean, basically the conundrum is, and this is something I faced years ago. It seems that government, police, big industry, whatever, they'll call out the illegal grow operations that are massive and well constructed as evil, masterminded, large grows. You remember back in the day. I mean, the bigger it was, the more well organized it was, the more evil it was. I mean, that was just a general rule of the drug war. But yet, the very first thing they want to do, it seems like the biggest urge that they have, they being, again, big government, kind of entities that were saying that were the very ones that were saying that the big grows were evil. That's the very first thing they want to do when they regulate cannabis, is put it all in a big grow so they can control it, so that it's easy to see and focus on. And it's just this urge to control that I think is so much at odds with the actual problem at hand. And just to go a little further with it, that it seems that the bigger conundrum also is that, we, Al and I, going back many years, we're told, and we actually use this talking point about the states being the laboratory of democracy, the laboratory of the states, that we would do all these things in states and the federal government would learn from that. And the federal government never learned from anything. They're struggling just to get a bill going that even represents the starting point, not the end point of our understanding out in the field. And to try to take advantage of what you're talking about, small business, not removing the criminal element by force, but engaging them. I mean, that's kind of, I guess, art of war. You remove your enemy by having them join you and becoming one. That's what we need to do. I think that's everybody in our camp, Veterans Action Council, Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. We're all completely in line on that's what we need to do, not eradicate this, traditional black market or whatever you want to call it, but engage it and erase it by engaging it and bringing it into the fold. So anyway, how do you even begin to deal with that?
Well, I mean, it's a seemingly difficult lift, but I think one of the ways that Al said it earlier is it's simple but difficult. And first, what we can see from the cannabis industry is that they know how to do business. They know how to survive. They know how to figure out how to move their product, how to meet the market needs. And that's what you need as an entrepreneur. We've watched this evolution of the state become so onerous, not only in cannabis, but just as a whole. And I'm largely speaking as an example of California, where the regulations are, it's to the point where you're not actually a business owner. You're a government affairs specialist that has to do everything possible to understand what it is that the government wants you to do as it wrote your business plan. You don't, here in California, you don't really have a business plan. You have the state's plan, and you're just trying to figure out how to maneuver through it. And that's not how I believe business works. That's not the intent of the American political system from its original inception. It's figuring out, first it's putting somebody who, to be very frank, has had the firsthand experience of having his business crushed by regulations and taxation, and understanding this is not how this does not work, and creating a structure that allows businesses to function, that allows businesses to actually do business rather than do government affairs. When I first built the distribution company, already knew that we were going to spend a significant amount of time trying to articulate the regulations to all of the partners that we were working with, because I knew that most companies were spending so much time trying to figure out how to get licensed, how to get their permits, how to navigate the regulatory environment, that they, just to exist, not to do business. Because it's one thing to get licensed, get permitted and licensed. If you already have the ability, for example, to cultivate, you also need to know how to navigate the licensing process and the interface with the CDTFA and the CDFA, and make sure that they're not going to be shut down immediately. And because you have this like pending doom sitting over your shoulder as a farmer, because if you do something wrong, you can't just go hide it. And then you got somebody from the BCC or somebody from the DCC showing up, and now all of a sudden your 10 years of work and your home are not available for to do business. And so we had a team of consultants who were extremely well informed on California's cannabis regulation. And so we would spend hours talking with farmers and manufacturers to make sure that they knew exactly what needed to be on their packaging, how the packaging needed to be presented, what the information was on there. And we did all of that for free. We made sure that they all had the information to be successful, because we were investing our time in making sure that everybody's time was going to be beneficial. And we did our best, but that was just a huge onerous process, and it made it extremely difficult to even be a business owner, just because of how, again, onerous it was. And so I think if we can get there, we can have somebody who writes a regulatory structure at the national level that can be of benefit for all of the small businesses. That will be extremely valuable. And I think that first starts with, how do we get business to actually business? And that's interstate commerce, that's export, and that's reducing the total amount of regulatory obligations for the companies. We need people to actually have the ability to sell cannabis to all people that need it and want it. And we also need the ability, like we talked about before, to do the research necessary to understand the total medicinal value and make sure that we are applying the total value of the plant to the needs of the humans. And that, I think, is an extremely important step that we haven't really taken seriously at the national level. And so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, and I was going to basically ask you the same thing. But one little statistic you laid out before I have a comment is it was pretty astounding. You said something like 75% of the present cannabis retail market, I guess, is off the books. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, it's roughly, I think the regulated market is making roughly $200 to $250 million a month in California. And that might have gone up in the last few years. But yeah,
it's the percentage that, the percentage that yeah. And boy, if that isn't right in your face, boy, you're doing it wrong, the state of California. Let me go to my thing here.
Yeah.
I might have brought this up with you the other night, and you said the word, and thank you. Cannabis is a plant. So all these rules and regulations that are laid on this plant, California being notorious, other places not so bad, other places absolutely ridiculous, depending on the severity of the ignorance. It's a plant. And it's not treated as a plant. It's treated as a drug. That's why we got all these troubles. Now, our society has decided, even if it's a drug, if you're 21 years old and a rational human being, you can buy it in a store, Colorado, Oregon, et cetera. So maybe I suggest that we should try to convince the administrators, legislators, regulators, that it's a plant and it should be treated as a plant. Now, in Florida, where I am, the control, if you will, of hemp and cannabis is in the agriculture department of the state. That's where I think it belongs. If we can treat cannabis the plant like tomato the plant, a lot of these problems are going to go away. Now, that doesn't mean there's going to be any less regulation of purity or quality or any of that shit. I'm not saying that. We have ways that we inspect our food, and it's pretty damn good. But anyway, I throw at you, Chris, the concept maybe is to, and we've been through this over the decades, Mike and I, is to sort of change the discussion, confuse it even by saying to these people who use the word drug, well, you know, right off the get-go, sir, ma'am, it's a plant, and we got to look at it. It grows in the ground and dirt, you know.
With or without it.
So I suggest that out there as a way of readdressing the program. I'm not saying we can dismiss everything that ever happened, but what do you think about that? You got a take on that?
Yeah, it's another ag product. Let's not make it complicated. I think it's a great product. Like you said, it's a plant, grows in the ground, doesn't require humans. So obviously it's naturally occurring. So let's do what we do with anything else in the ag space. Again, let's not compromise safety. Let's be wise about it. But yeah, it should be one of our major agricultural exports to the world. And I think we could substantially change the economic outlook for the United States based on that alone.
I was just putting in
Michael,
the chat.
you're up.
Well, I was just putting in the chat a little note. I thought it was so interesting. Kenzie brought this up, but he was looking at chili peppers, capsicum. I guess is the element.
Capsaicin, I believe.
Capsaicin. I can't quite say it. But anyway, it's a medicine. It's a medicinal agent, quite useful. But obviously, chili peppers are quite a common food. But another interesting wrinkle of that was that not only is it a plant, you know, you can grow it in your garden, certainly with no regulatory oversight to grow chili peppers in your garden. And it's a food and a medicine, but also it's a controlled agent, a warfare agent. If you have it in a pepper spray, it can be a very highly controlled thing at borders and as a weapon of war. So you know, there's a really interesting example. I mean, things you know, can actually be very you know, highly controlled that come from plants, but that doesn't mean the plant itself has to be regulated and controlled. And I think that's Al's point. If I'm right, Al can correct me. But I'm really interested. First of all, back to what you were saying before, I just had a little comment I saved on that as well. Back when the Oakland Cannabis Buyers Club case came up in the U.S. Supreme Court, and there was some question about, cannabis and whether you were able to have a dispensary or not. Champs, which was my dispensary. I was actually a member of Champs in San Francisco, one of the best run dispensaries in the world. And I was actually a member of that dispensary. Michael Aldrich was my caregiver there. One of our
I remember that place.
Yeah, and that shut down. It immediately shut down. And my point being that, as we, run into these issues, the very finest cannabis and some of the very finest people that grow it were the first to try to grow it legally. The small farmers in California, and they were, some of the probably the best cannabis and leading the standard of the market for the entire nation under the illegal markets. And yet the illegal markets don't have their benefit. I guess my point being, we've seen this race to the bottom where as you have legal markets, more and more legal markets, what's being sold on the, let's call it illegal markets, is less and less quality. You'll get the seconds from the legal market that didn't make the store, or worse, you get counterfeits of big name items that show up in the big name markets, and they don't even ship the item. They just make a counterfeit version of it. And we're bracing for impact, waiting for, like things like fentanyl to show up in fake counterfeit vape cartridges, because it's just a matter of time before that,
Yep.
that starts happening. So I think it's just really important to point out that, not only, are you losing all that revenue, that 75%, but that 75% is becoming more and more and more less and less and less quality and safe from our perspective, that's out there in the world. And
Agreed.
that's the entire United States basically has that same ratio or higher, 75% and up, I'd say probably be the ratio. But what you were talking about before, I'd like to get into, if you don't mind, kind of switching gears totally here. But I sit at a seat where I kind of look at people's skill sets and I try to place them. And you're one of an anomaly for us, someone who's actually running for office. Don't get me wrong. We've had a lot of people on here that have run for office or even held office. It wasn't that long ago. I remember we had Jesse Ventura on our show. That was
Wow.
fun. But
Nice.
yeah, right now, people are paying attention to things in a way that's different than before. So like what China is potentially doing or could be doing out there in the sea, the building islands and creating territory, all this crazy stuff that was of interest before. Now with what Russia's doing, it's a geopolitical puzzle that I've got friends that are hemp store owners at midnight asking me geopolitical questions about Russia and China. It's on people's minds. And it seems to me you would be an absolutely perfect fit with your skill set to get into that conversation in Congress and help, sort this out. I don't know. I'm just throwing this on your plate. Both of these things, in a way, you can talk about them as you will, but that's where I'm coming from. Is right now, it's some scary stuff. I was in the height of the Cold War. Al served the Vietnam era. The notion that we've got an active war in the middle of Europe, and that there are geopolitical ties to China and potential futures that can go various different ways that vary wildly, is of great interest to us.
Yeah, we've got an interesting future headed, right in front of us, and I don't think we're getting the full picture when it comes to us being the American public. I think there's a lot of things that are being left out. I think there is a information campaign taking place from both Western side of things and from the adversaries, if you will. From Russia, Russia's going to have its narrative. The United States is going to have its narrative. Europe's going to have its narrative. And China is really the one benefiting, just kind of sitting back saying, keep playing, guys. It does nothing but benefit China. And I would love to bring that expertise and that experience to Congress, because right now we're not seeing anybody talk about it. And that's probably one of the most concerning things that I'm watching. We're not watching people bring up the major threats to the United States, to our economy, to the value of the dollar. This is not chess. This is 3D space chess, on so many levels that's taking place. And it's a very complex.
Froze there, Chris.
Of against humans taking place constantly. And we need to make sure that that's addressed. We need to make sure that that is stopped. But we also need to make sure that we have our eye on the big picture. If we look at the history, which oddly the mainstream media has decided not to incorporate into the narrative, but Russia has had no less than 8 years to plan this operation. If you look at the 2014 Bucharest Summit Declaration, item number 23, you look at an invite from NATO to Ukraine to join NATO. And immediately following that declaration in 2014, you have a response from Russia saying, no, you don't. And if you continue to press this, then we will press our side too. And so Russia watched what happened in 2014 and took notes. So they knew every single step that the United States was going to take. They knew that the economic sanctions were coming. They knew all of the initial responses from the Western nations that was going to take place. And they had 8 years to plan this. And for those of us in the military, you can get a lot of planning done in 8 years, particularly when you know that it's about to be your biggest move. So I think we need to take that into consideration, because Putin is not dumb. Putin is a geostrategic genius, and he has spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I think we need to approach this with the respect necessary, that this person and his group are taking very deliberate actions and measures. Now, it doesn't mean that everything's going their way and that they have it all figured out, but they're not just showing up just to make noise. I think that there's a bigger strategy here. I think we have to make sure that we understand how we define success as we measure what's taking place in Ukraine and outside of the Western political and financial system. I think we need to really examine what's taking place and what's driving the actions that are happening. And I don't see that conversation happening yet. I see us sending hundreds of millions of dollars worth of materiel, but I don't know that we are really delving into the nuances. So yeah, there's a lot to discuss there. There's a lot to unpack, and it's doing nothing but putting China in a much stronger place. And I expect that we will find out that China has been along this ride with Russia this whole time, and why Congress is not talking about that, why we're not making sure that the American public is aware of it, and making sure that our attention is focused on the big picture rather than, I don't say this as a negative comment, but it is in my opinion, a distraction. It is distracting our military resources. It is distracting our financial resources. And it is taking our attention away from all of the things that China has been building through the Brick and Road initiative over the last 10 plus years. And just because the world is at war, just because there is a war taking place, doesn't mean that all the other countries stop doing what they're doing. It doesn't mean that their agenda, they don't put it on hold because there's a war somewhere in the world. They start advancing it further. So again, it's a long conversation, and I look forward to having it, and I look forward to bringing the expertise to Congress, because we desperately need to address some of these challenges, which are going to come to our doorstep here in the United States, and it's going to come to our pockets too. And I think that's the real danger that we're facing here.
Well, this has been a great conversation as well.
I agree.
A little long, so we're going to have to part ways here pretty quick. But before we do, how about letting our audience know how they get a hold of you? You're running for Congress in the 2nd District of California. That's up in the north, guys. And this man could use your help and your money and your volunteerism and all of the stuff that we all know is necessary. He's a decorated, honored vet, and that gives him another place in our hearts as well. So if you're up there in his country and you're a veteran, you get on this guy's bandwagon. And how do they do that? How do they find you? How do they give you help?
Well, they can go to the website. It's Chris2Congress, all spelled out, ChrisTOCongress.com. They can find me on Instagram at Chris2Congress, and LinkedIn and Facebook. All of them are at Chris2Congress. And you can also send me an email at info@Chris2Congress.com, spelled the same way. And it's definitely a big fight, and I think it's time for all of us to stand up, and I can use all the help I can get.
I sure do. Thank you for coming on. Everybody, you've been listening to Veterans Voices with myself, Mike Crowitz, and my esteemed co-host, Al Byrne from Veterans for Medical Cannabis Access. This has been Veterans Voices number 16 with Chris Coulombe, heading to California, 24th of April, 2022. and look forward to seeing you soon. Hopefully we'll get back out in a couple of weeks, but it's been a little bit of a hard season for us. 420 around April 20th is work time for us. You know, it's like everybody else is a vacation. So everybody, much love. Thanks for coming on and being with us. Thanks again, Chris, for coming on.
Thank you both, gentlemen. Appreciate the time.